It always started the same way. The clatter. That sharp, jarring sound of plastic meeting steel. A momentary silence, then the slow crunch, like bones giving way under pressure. And finally, the soft purr of a luxury engine pulling away, indifferent. From the kitchen, I heard it all. The crash, the grinding, the deliberate pause, the retreat. I stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, coffee mug warm between my palms, eyes closed, not out of surprise, but out of habit. The sound no longer startled me. What broke inside me now wasn't shock. It was fatigue and something far heavier, shame. Across the kitchen, Claire stood by the window, my daughter, 16, with her mother's sharp cheekbones and my silence. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her reflection in the glass told me everything I needed to know. She watched the street like it was a crime scene, because it was. On the curb lay what used to be our trash can, split in two, its contents, banana peels, yesterday's mail, a cereal box, scattered like confetti at a party no one wanted to attend. Marla Denton's silver Range Rover turned the corner, her brake lights blinking in mock farewell. She never looked back. She never did. Claire turned to me. Her voice, when it finally came, was small. Again? I nodded because anything more would have cracked the dam. It was Tuesday. It was always Tuesday. 6:15 in the morning, like clockwork. And for the third time in as many weeks, our trash can had become collateral damage. But what hurt more than the plastic carcass outside, what sank deeper than the scrape on the driveway, was that look in my daughter's eyes. That tight, embarrassed look of a teenager watching her father being humiliated and doing nothing to stop it. I had done nothing. Not yet. "Go finish getting ready," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "I'll clean it up." She hesitated. She wanted to say something, anything, but instead, she disappeared down the hall, the echo of her steps bouncing off the hardwood. I set my coffee down and stepped outside. The Georgia morning was cold in a way that sneaked up on you, humid, bitter, biting. The corner of Crescent Hill Estates where we lived looked picturesque. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, trees trimmed to uniform heights. But beneath that perfect veneer was a rot. You could smell it if you paid attention, somewhere between control and condescension. Our house sat on the corner lot, near the bend that curved around the community's artificial lake. A beautiful view, they said at the open house. What they didn't mention was how the HOA bylaws could turn beauty into a weapon. I crouched down and began picking up the pieces. Coffee filters soaked through the pavement, an orange juice carton flattened by the impact, a family photo, clipped accidentally to some junk mail, now lying face down in the gutter. I turned it over. Claire, Noah, and me, back when smiles came easier, when we still believed this move was a new beginning. Now, all I could think about was how this place had become a stage for humiliation. This wasn't the first time, not even the 10th. It had started subtle, sideways glances, passive-aggressive notes about community standards, warnings for mailbox color codes and grass height. And then it escalated. Because people like Marla Denton do not like being ignored, especially by men like me. She never said it out loud, but she did not have to. The message was clear. You do not belong here. You're not our kind of quiet. There's a silence men like me learn to carry. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind. The kind forged in family courtrooms and custody mediations. The kind worn like a second skin in neighborhoods like this, where everything looks pretty, but nothing feels safe. I placed the last piece of cracked plastic beside the garage, where its 3 predecessors waited like headstones. Then I looked down the street toward Marla's house, 3 doors down, with the wreath on her door and the surveillance sign on her lawn. She had not just run over our trash, she had run over our dignity. Again. And again. And again. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the way Claire refused to look at me afterward. Maybe it was the hollowness in my own chest. Maybe it was the fact that I had already replaced that can 4 times this fall, each one more expensive than the last. Or maybe it was just the fact that I was done. Done pretending this was normal. Done pretending silence was strength. Done letting someone weaponize order to disguise cruelty. I walked back inside, pulled out a pen and paper, and began writing, not to her, but to myself. Because this was not just a broken trash can, this was a war disguised as routine, and I had no intention of losing. I did not come here looking for war. I came here looking for quiet. After the divorce, I needed silence, not the kind that screamed from empty rooms, but the kind that wrapped itself around you like a second chance. Claire and Noah needed space. I needed structure, the kind of routine you could count on. Lunch boxes packed the same way each morning, homework done at the kitchen table, bedtimes predictable, arguments avoidable. When the real estate agent showed me the house on the corner of Crescent Hill Estates, I remember the way the light fell through the east-facing windows and landed right on the living room floor, like some invitation. "You'll like the quiet," she said, with that realtor smile stretched across her face. "It's peaceful here. HOA keeps everything tidy. Rules make good neighbors, I should have known. Tidy never meant kind, and rules, well, they rarely worked in favor of men like me. Still, I bought it, 3 bedrooms, brick facade, a backyard just big enough to pitch a tent in, close to decent schools, close enough to the lake for weekend walks, far enough from her, their mother, to feel like we had our own start. I remember watching Claire pick out her room. She traced the edge of the window frame like it was something sacred. "This one has the best light," she said. Noah picked the room closest to the kitchen. "Less walking for snacks," he grinned. And me? I picked the furthest corner in the house for my room, as if distance could protect us from echoes. For a while, it worked. There were late-night pizza slices and laundry piled too high. There were wet footprints trailing in from the lake and garage shelves half-built, but full of promise. There were jokes over breakfast and sleepy good nights, and even the beginnings of healing. But healing, I've learned, does not fit inside the lines drawn by a homeowners association. At first, I mistook it for structure. The HOA guidelines came in a leather-bound binder, literally with gold lettering embossed on the cover. Crescent Hill Estates, a community of excellence. Excellence, it seemed, was measured in inches. Lawn height, no taller than 2.5 inches. Mailbox color, approved shades only. Heritage green, soft gray, or antique black. Trash can placement, not visible from the street except on collection day, and even then, only within a 3-hour window. There were meetings, of course, held on the first Tuesday of each month, in the community center just past the rose trellis near the artificial lake. I went to one. That was enough. They spoke in the code, preserving values, protecting traditions, safeguarding the tone of the neighborhood. What they meant was, keep it quiet, keep it white, keep it familiar. I saw the way Leonard Crane, the HOA president, looked at me the first time I introduced myself. His smile was a fraction too tight, his handshake limp, like something he wanted to be done with. "Electrician, huh?" he said. "Well, every neighborhood needs a handy guy, I suppose." I was not handy. I was licensed, certified, experienced. But he did not care about that. He had already filed me under utility class, the man you call when your lights flicker, not when your opinion matters. I let it slide. I let a lot of things slide back then, because I told myself this was just a transition, because the kids needed peace more than I needed pride, because starting over meant swallowing hard and choosing your battles. So I stayed quiet. When the HOA sent my first warning letter for a mailbox shade 1 hue too dark, I repainted it. When they flagged me for my lawn growing too high during a rainy week, I cut it twice in 3 days. When Marla Denton stopped me on the sidewalk one afternoon and asked if I could please not leave your work truck in the driveway overnight, I smiled and said I'd move it, even though it was parked well within regulation, because I believed, naively, that if I followed their rules, they would leave me alone. But in Crescent Hill Estates, silence was not rewarded. It was punished, because silence looked like permission, like compliance, like submission. Marla Denton was not elected. She was not appointed. She simply appeared, like mold in the corners of your bathroom. No announcement, no vote. One day she was just there, walking the neighborhood in her tennis shoes and cashmere, clipboard in hand, pen poised like a weapon. She introduced herself during our second week. "You must be the new resident on the corner lot," she said, extending her hand like it was charity. I shook it. told her my name. She nodded, her eyes already scanning the outline of my garage. Well, I am Marla. I serve as compliance liaison for the board. There was no such role in the bylaws. I checked. What she meant was, I am the neighborhood enforcer, the whisper behind every fine, the ghost in every mailbox. She spoke with the kind of confidence reserved for women who had never been told no. And from that moment on, I became a project. I would find paper slips tucked in my screen door. Friendly reminder, trash bins should not be visible from the sidewalk. Or small notes in flowing cursive. We've noticed your porch light has an unauthorized wattage. She once left me a printout of acceptable lawn gnome types. Lawn gnomes. But I kept swallowing it, because I was not here to fight. I was here to raise my kids. I was here to rebuild a life. And for a while, I convinced myself that if I just kept my head down, if I just stayed quiet long enough, they would forget I was even here. But that was not what Marla Denton wanted. People like her do not want silence. They want surrender. They want you to nod, apologize, comply. And the more I tried to stay invisible, the more visible I became. To her, I was the exception she could not control, the outlier, the symbol of something that didn't fit her version of excellence. The trash can was just the beginning. The next Tuesday, it happened again. Same time, same sound, 6:15. The hum of tires crunching gravel, a low metallic screech, the dull thud of impact, then silence. By the time I opened the front door, the garbage was already spread across the sidewalk like an accusation. The can was cracked open along its spine, slumped over as if it had given up. And at the end of the street, just turning the corner, was the now familiar flash of silver, Marla Denton's Range Rover, spotless even in the dew. This time, it was Claire who got to it first. She stood in the driveway barefoot, arms crossed, jacket wrapped tight around her chest like armor. She did it again, she said, without turning to me. That makes 4. I picked up the lid, cracked in 2, and looked at it like it could somehow give me an answer. Instead, it gave me a question. At what point does a pattern stop being accidental? I bent to start gathering the debris. Claire bent beside me, wordless. Banana peels, a milk jug, crushed soda cans. Our lives spilled onto the pavement for everyone to see. She looked right at me this time, Claire added. I was standing at the window. She saw me, then hid it anyway. I did not reply. I could not yet, because something had shifted in me. It was not rage, not quite. It was realization, cold, clean, logical. This was not carelessness. It was not even neglect. This was performance, deliberate, repetitive, targeted. And that meant it could be traced. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Heavy cream envelope, HOA seal embossed at the top. Addressed not to Mr. Brennan, but to resident of 114 Cornerstone Drive. A distinction that told me more than I needed to know. Inside, a printed violation notice. Improper trash receptacle placement. Section 4.7.3 of the Crescent Hill bylaws. It warned of safety risks, claimed obstruction of traffic, it cited rules, it referenced photos I had never seen. It ended with a deadline, 72 hours to comply or face daily fines of $50. $50. I read the notice twice, then a third time, examining every line for logic, for fairness, for fact. But what I saw instead were assumptions. Words dressed in legalese, cloaked in the illusion of neutrality, but dripping with accusation. It was not just the tone, it was the language of power disguised as policy. That night, I stood in the kitchen staring at the trash can, its broken plastic body taped together with duct tape, sitting beside the garage like a wounded animal waiting to be put down. Claire walked in, still in her school clothes, her shoes muddy from track practice. "Are they going to kick us out?" she asked, without preamble. I turned. "What?" "At school, someone said HOA boards can evict families, especially if they don't follow rules." She hesitated. "Especially if they make trouble." I set the coffee mug down too hard. It cracked along the rim, splintering into a spiderweb of lines that mirrored the one on my driveway from the last trash can incident. "No one's kicking us out," I said, quieter than I meant to. "This is our house. She nodded, but the worry in her eyes did not fade. And in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in years, the cold pulse of helplessness. Not because I could not fight this, but because my kids believed I could not. That was when I decided to talk to Marla Denton directly. It was Thursday afternoon, early fall. The leaves were just beginning to dry and curl at the edges, painting the sidewalk in shades of brittle gold. I found her 3 streets down, inspecting a neighbor's mailbox with the kind of intensity reserved for forensics labs. "Marla," I said, keeping my voice even. She turned slowly, as if already annoyed. The clipboard in her hand hovered like a gavel. "Eli," she replied, eyes already narrowing. "I wanted to speak to you about the trash can situation." She sighed, loudly, and smiled. That kind of smile people use when they have already decided the outcome of a conversation before it begins. "I assume this is about the notice you received?" "No," I said. "It's about the 4 trash cans that have been destroyed in front of my home. On the same day, at the same time, by the same vehicle. Are you implying I'm responsible for that?" Her tone was sharp, theatrical. Her hand went to her chest like a stunned debutante. "I'm stating that there seems to be a pattern. One, I believe you are involved in..." She stepped closer. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Brennan." The way she said Mr. Brennan carried the weight of something that was not quite hatred, but was absolutely contempt. "This is a community, not a construction zone. We have rules here, standards, order. We take pride in appearance, in conduct, in uniformity." Her voice dropped a note, became silkier and colder. "And some people," she said, "some people come here thinking their past lives entitle them to disrupt that." I stared at her. She meant divorce. She meant working class. She meant, "You do not belong." "This has nothing to do with rules," I said flatly. "This has to do with harassment." "Harassment?" She laughed. "You think I have time to target your garbage can, Eli?" She leaned forward, voice low and private. "Maybe you should focus on raising your children properly instead of trying to undermine this community." I stepped back. Not because I was afraid, but because if I stayed 1 second longer, I might say something I would regret. And Marla Denton? She was waiting for that. She wanted escalation, because escalation meant control. So I said nothing, turned and walked away. But something inside me had clicked into place. I had seen this before. Different setting, same story. When someone hides behind rules to justify control, the problem is not the rule, it is the rule maker. Back home, I opened my laptop. I did not search for attorneys, not yet. I searched for city ordinances, property lines, public right-of-way definitions, trash collection placement requirements, because if this was going to be a game of rules, then it was time I learned every single one of them. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a courtroom ruling. It is not the heavy hush of reverence. It is not even the stunned quiet of disbelief. It is something more precise, like the muted static left behind when a power line snaps, a hum you carry in your chest for days. The day the judge signed the final decree, I remember standing just outside the courthouse under a gray January sky. Claire was 13. Noah had just turned 11. Their mother held their hands like she was protecting them from me. The court had ruled she would get primary custody, not because I was violent, not because I was dangerous, but because I worked long hours, because I rented, because when the system draws a line, it always draws it through the man with the calloused hands. I remember the judge's voice, dry, rehearsed. "I trust that both parents will uphold the best interests of the children." What he meant was, be quiet, stay in line, accept what we've decided for you. I did, for a while. I learned how to make peace with weekends, with every other holidays, with waving from the driver's seat on Sunday evenings while they disappeared into a house I no longer belonged to. That moment taught me what silence can cost. It taught me that surrender, even when disguised as cooperation, leaves scars. Years before that, decades actually, I learned the same lesson in a different place. I was 12, 6th grade, public school in rural Tennessee. There was a teacher, Mr. Rawlings. He wore old corduroy jackets and drank too much coffee. He once told our class that some people are born with less capacity for leadership. And when I raised my hand, confused, not combative, and asked what he meant, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll understand when you're older." I did not understand. Not then. I only knew the way he looked at me felt wrong, like I was being measured and found lacking. That night, I told my father. He was a quiet man, a welder, the kind who never missed church and kept receipts for everything. He wrote a letter to the school board, not angry, just factual. 2 days later, I was called into the office. They said I had displayed disruptive behavior. They said I had a problem with authority. They suspended me for 5 days. At 12, I learned that pointing out injustice would not earn you applause. It would earn you punishment. That memory has faded at the edges, like old photographs left in the sun. But its shape remains sharp. It is the shape of every room where I have felt unwelcome, every meeting where my credentials had to be explained twice, every conversation that ended with someone saying, "Well, we just want to keep things consistent." Crescent Hill Estates is full of that same tone. It's in the way they write their letters, polite but firm, in the way they say, "Some neighbors just don't understand the expectations here," in the way Marla Denton calls me Eli with a smirk, like the name itself is an inconvenience. They never say what they mean, but they do not have to. That is the thing about exclusion. It is efficient. You feel it before you hear it. And now, somehow, all of that, the courtroom, the school hallway, the years of quietly moving through a world not built for people like me, had manifested itself in a plastic trash can. Every Tuesday it stood at the curb, mute, ordinary, disposable. Except that it wasn't. It was mine, my property, my right. It was a container for refuse, yes, but also for defiance. And week after week, Marla had chosen to destroy it. Not because it was in her way, but because it was not supposed to be seen. That is the difference. What she hit with her Range Rover was not just plastic. It was a symbol, a challenge. It was a reminder that someone she could not fully control still existed within her line of sight. I started to see it that way one afternoon as I stood in the garage, the door half open to the humid Georgia air. The broken trash can leaned against the wall like an injured soldier. 3 more were stacked beside it, each with its own set of cracks, scuffs, and duct tape scars. I stared at them like artifacts, like evidence. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, a kind of curated peace, sprinklers ticking in rhythm, lawns trimmed to regulation, windows shuttered just so. And me? I was the crack in the veneer, the variable in their algorithm, the one house that had become noticeable. It is a strange thing to realize you are being watched not because you are dangerous, but because you simply exist. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he asked, "Why do they hate our trash cans so much?" I smiled, because what else can a father do? "They do not hate the can," I said. "They hate that it's mine." He looked confused. "But it's just a can." I wanted to tell him everything, about courtrooms and coded language, about school offices and HOA meetings, about the way certain people only love order when they are the ones who define it. But I did not. Because at 14, a boy should still believe the world makes sense. Instead, I kissed the top of his head, turned out the light, and whispered, "It will be okay." Then I went back into the garage and stared at the pile of broken trash cans. And I made a promise to myself. This time, I would not stay quiet. This time, I would not let them define the narrative. This time, I would not accept being disposable. They wanted a man who would bend. What they got was a man who had already been broken once, and rebuilt himself stronger. It was time they learned the difference. It came in another cream-colored envelope, same HOA seal, same faux formality font, same smell of toner and arrogance. But this time, it felt different, because this time, the letter was not just about trash. It was about me. Notice of violation, behavior detrimental to community cohesion. Sanction formal review pending. Fine, $100. Reference section 9.2.4. Undue disruption of neighborhood harmony. They had underlined the word disruption. That was new. I read it 3 times. There was no mention of a specific incident, no evidence attached, just vague language about repeated tension, non-cooperation with community standards, and the risk posed by hostile interactions. I had spoken to no one. I had argued with no one. All I had done was clean up my driveway and refuse to apologize for existing. But what chilled me more than the wording was the timing. The letter arrived the morning after I noticed two mothers at the community mailbox whispering when I walked past. One of them stepped in front of her daughter like I was something contagious. A day earlier, Noah had come home with a question that didn't belong to any 14-year-old. "Dad, am I the reason they think we're dangerous?" He had overheard something at school. A classmate whose mother said, "That family on Cornerstone, they're trouble. I heard they're being watched." He did not know what it meant, but I did. The war had moved beyond plastic and pavement. It had become personal, and it was being fought with innuendo. Marla had changed tactics. When destruction didn't provoke a reaction, she turned to defamation. And in places like Crescent Hill Estates, character assassination wears perfume and pearls. So I did what any decent electrician would do. I started wiring up defenses. I installed 2 motion-activated cameras, one at the end of the driveway, angled toward the street, and one above the garage, positioned to catch anything approaching from the left. I upgraded the doorbell to a full video system with cloud storage. I set up notifications on my phone. Every movement, every sound, every change in pattern. I built a digital net around my home, not because I was afraid, but because I was finally awake. Every Tuesday morning, I reviewed the footage like a detective examining a crime scene. The same vehicle, the same speed, the same angle of approach. Every Tuesday, the trash can suffered, and every Tuesday, the woman responsible left without so much as a pause. But now, I had timestamps. Now, I had angles. Now, I had evidence. And evidence is the one language tyrants never learn to speak. I opened a spreadsheet, named it Incident Log, Crescent Hill, HOA Dispute. Each row marked with date, time, footage file, name, weather conditions, debris field radius, and repair cost. By the end of the first week, I had 4 entries. By the end of the month, I had 12. And with each new cell filled, I felt something I had not felt since the courthouse ruling years ago. Control. Marla did not know it yet, but every rattle of her engine, every inch her tires rolled over my boundary was being archived. Not for revenge, for record. Because paper, despite what she thought, could be heavier than concrete when signed by the right judge. It was not just the cameras. I began photographing everything. Grass height, mailbox paint, porch light bulbs. If a rule existed, I complied. But more than that, I documented. I built my own case. I measured distance from curb to trash placement. 33 inches. I took photos at dawn and dusk, showing visibility only on collection day. I compared that to her violations, because yes, Marla Denton had them too. Her flower bed extended past regulation length. Her porch railing was faded to a shade not listed on the HOA-approved palette. She parked her Range Rover halfway across the sidewalk every Thursday night during her wine and books club. I did not call it hypocrisy. I called it selective enforcement, and courts love that phrase. Meanwhile, the whispers grew louder. One afternoon, Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down crossed the street while I was watering the front hedge. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," she said, eyes darting. "Why?" She lowered her voice. "Marla told the board you're collecting footage. Said you're trying to provoke a lawsuit. Said you're unstable." I blinked, then smiled tightly. "That's not entirely inaccurate," I said. "I am collecting footage, but you're not unstable." "No," I said. "I'm methodical." She hesitated, then whispered, "Good." That night, I logged her interaction in the spreadsheet. Not to use, just to remember. I had begun to see everything in patterns now, in variables, in lines of code behind the curtain of civility. People like Marla depend on silence, on isolation, on their victims assuming they are alone. But the moment you start documenting, the moment you treat oppression like a systems failure, you start to rewire the power structure. And wiring, that's what I do. I fix things for a living. Loose circuits, burnt fuses, damaged grounding. But this time, I was building something stronger than wires. I was building proof. And proof, when applied correctly, does not just expose the lie. It electrifies the truth. Every line of code tells a story. Every regulation, a boundary, and every system, no matter how tight, is built by people, which means, by nature, it can be unraveled. I spent 2 nights cross-referencing every city ordinance related to residential waste collection, zoning maps, municipal trash guidelines, county public works memos, HOA overlays. I bookmarked, annotated, printed, highlighted. By 3 a.m. on the second night, I had what I needed. City Ordinance 12.4.9. Residential waste bins must be placed no more than 3 feet from the curb on collection day and returned to a concealed area within 24 hours. It was there in plain language. Nothing vague, nothing discretionary, just law. The key detail, 3 feet from the curb. Not hidden, not out of view, not per HOA request. And more importantly, HOA jurisdiction ends at the property line, which meant, on collection day, my trash can was within city-mandated placement and outside HOA authority. That changed everything, but legal leverage only matters if it can be reinforced. And I knew how to reinforce things. Literally. It started with a conversation at the Home Depot contractor desk. Dale Kowalski had been pouring concrete for 20 years. He looked like someone who had survived both drywall dust and 3 divorces. I slid a napkin across the counter with a crude sketch, a rectangular shell, reinforced core, drainage vents, standard dimensions. His eyes narrowed with appreciation. You trying to build a tank or take out raccoons? Something in between, I said. We spent 20 minutes going over materials. Plastic exterior casing to match standard neighborhood cans. Steel rebar frame to distribute impact, 60 pounds of fast-setting concrete mix, drainage holes to prevent pooling, handle rivets sealed with silicone. Total cost, $47. I assembled it in my garage over a weekend. Claire and Noah helped, alternating between laughter and disbelief. "This thing's bulletproof," Noah said, tapping it with a wrench. "Not quite," I replied, "but it might just survive Tuesdays." On Monday night, I positioned it curbside, identical in appearance to the 4 that came before it, but inside, unmovable, unbreakable. Tuesday, 6:15 a.m., right on cue. The Range Rover approached. I watched from the kitchen window, steaming mug in hand. Claire stood beside me, silent. Marla did not slow. The moment of impact was theatrical. A sudden jerk of metal, a scraping noise like a door being ripped off its hinges, and a jarring metallic groan that lingered in the still morning air. The can barely budged. Her front bumper split at the corner. A hairline crack like a spider web bloomed outward. She reversed, pulled forward, tried again. Same result. Same sound. Then she sat there, idle, fuming. Claire whispered, "Should I go out and wave?" I nearly laughed. Instead, I turned back to the screen where the doorbell camera had captured it all. That morning, I added a new entry to the spreadsheet. Collision attempt number 13, 6:15 a.m. Bumper fracture visible, video file, 1103_crash1.move. And then I started digging deeper. Because if this woman was willing to sacrifice her luxury SUV for the sake of intimidation, then either she had more power than I realized, or something to hide. I began requesting public records, HOA board minutes, contractor payments, vendor approvals. In Georgia, homeowners associations are required to file annual financial disclosures. Most residents never read them, but I did. Tucked between quarterly landscaping expenses and common area maintenance costs were a series of entries that kept recurring. Vendor, Denton Services, LLC, payment descriptions, sidewalk repairs, clubhouse repainting, irrigation line maintenance, pest control estimates. Total payouts over 12 months, $23,400. I searched Denton Services in the business registration database. It was filed under a generic P.O. box in Atlanta. No website, no public phone. The ownership? 2 listed members, Richard Denton, majority holder, and Marla Denton, 40% stake. The documents were stamped and notarized, filed 5 months before the first HOA payment. I sat back in my chair, let the weight of it sink in. Marla was not just self-appointed compliance queen. She was profiting off the very rules she enforced. Every violation, every complaint, every citation. Each one pushed homeowners to request repairs, which just so happened to come from the one vendor she had a hidden stake in. Conflict of interest? Absolutely. Illegal? That depended on disclosure, and there was none. I scanned the board minutes. Each contract vote passed with little discussion. Marla abstained once. Voted aye on 5 others. That alone violated state nonprofit. Governance law. HOA board members must disclose financial relationships with vendors. Failure to do so. Grounds for removal. Grounds for civil liability. In some cases, criminal fraud. I documented everything. I compiled a report. Organized by timeline. Linked evidence. Screenshots. Contract totals. Video footage. Property code excerpts. By the end of the week, I had built a file that could make a city attorney salivate. But it was not about revenge. It was about recalibrating the power dynamic. Because for too long, people like Marla Denton built their empires on secrecy and intimidation. They built them on assumptions that the people they targeted would be too scared, too tired, too isolated to fight back. But she had picked the wrong neighbor this time. I was not just a father, not just a contractor, not just a corner lot resident. I was a man who understood wiring, and more importantly, how to flip the breaker on a corrupt system. The trash can was no longer just protection, it was bait. And what it caught was not just her SUV. It caught her pattern, her arrogance, her paper trail, her network of enablers. And now it was all wired, ready, waiting. The parking lot was full 20 minutes before the meeting began. Minivans and sedans lined the sidewalks like soldiers standing at attention. Some neighbors arrived early just to secure folding chairs. Others leaned against brick walls, clutching HOA bylaw booklets like Holy Scripture. At exactly 5:59 p.m., I wheeled it in. My trash can, the one they had not been able to break. Concrete core, reinforced steel, plastic skin. It rolled like thunder down the tiled floor of the Crescent Hill Community Center, leaving behind faint rubber tracks and a silence that buzzed with anticipation. The media arrived first, Channel 7, Channel 12, one stringer from the local Gazette. Then came Officer Martinez in uniform, notepad ready, body camera blinking red at his chest. Behind him, Patricia Lopez, board member, reluctant ally, motioned me forward with a curt nod. Her face was unreadable. That was good. It meant she was taking this seriously. And then, precisely at 6:07 p.m., Marla Denton made her entrance. Flanked by Leonard Crane, the HOA president, and some slick-haired attorney with a briefcase too shiny for a community meeting, she swept into the room wearing black from shoulder to heel, funeral attire for a reputation. People parted for her like a tide. Her smile was thin, manufactured. Her eyes scanned the crowd with sharp calculation. But when they landed on the trash can beside the podium, when she realized I had brought that, her mouth tightened just enough for me to see it. Game on. Leonard banged the gavel. We now opened the floor for public comments. Item 1. Violation appeals and resident grievances. I stood. Carried my file folder to the podium. Set it beside the trash can like a court exhibit. My name is Eli Brennan. I reside at 114 Cornerstone Drive, and I am here to address a pattern of harassment, selective enforcement, and financial misconduct. A murmur rolled through the room. Someone coughed. Patricia folded her arms. Officer Martinez shifted his weight. I clicked the remote. The projector screen flickered to life behind me. Slide 1. Screenshot from the HOA violation letter citing improper trash placement. Slide 2. City Ordinance 12.4.9, highlighted, within 3 feet of curb, collection day, exempt from HOA authority. Slide 3. A still frame from the first impact video, time-stamped, high resolution. Marla's Range Rover mid-collision. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Over the course of 8 weeks, I said, this woman, I pointed to Marla, who straightened in her seat, has intentionally collided with my trash can no fewer than 13 times. Each incident occurred at precisely 6:15 a.m. on collection day. Each incident was recorded, documented, stored off-site, and each time I was cited, not her. The footage played, a compilation, quick cuts, impact after impact, plastic breaking, metal bending, Marla reversing, approaching again, driving away. The final clip ended on her face, visible through the windshield, smirking, gasps, whispers. One neighbor cursed under her breath. I flipped the slide. Denton Services, LLC, payment ledger, 7 contracts, totaling $23,400. Vendor address, P.O. Box, 219, Atlanta. Ownership, Richard Denton, 60%. Marla Denton, 40%. The HOA handbook requires full disclosure of board member financial interests. Yet here, I held up the meeting minutes, are 5 contract approvals in which Marla Denton voted in favor of issuing funds to a company she partially owns. Marla stood. "This is a smear campaign," she shouted. "These documents are falsified. He's stalking me. He threatened me in front of my home." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Miss Denton," he said, "if you have evidence of that, you can file a report. But you will remain seated until public comment is complete. I will not be slandered by a man who doesn't even follow lawn regulations," she barked. I smiled calmly. "Slide 11, I said, clicking forward. A table appeared on screen. Enforcement map. Crescent Hill. HOA. Violations by household. 67 total citations over 6 months. 49 went to single parents, renters, or homeowners of color. 18 went to established long-term residents. One resident, me, received 15 violations. This is not enforcement, I said. It is targeting. It is profiling. And it is unethical. Marla's attorney finally stood, voice like polished glass. "My client demands an immediate adjournment of this meeting on grounds of defamation and potential legal exposure." Patricia raised her hand. "Denied," she said. "We're not done yet." And then, like the punctuation to a sentence written over, in months of quiet war, Officer Martinez stepped forward. "I am here," he said, "on behalf of the Pine County Sheriff's Department to serve this subpoena." He held up a thick envelope, Marla's name printed across the front. "Related to ongoing investigations into insurance fraud, property damage, and undisclosed financial interests in a governed board." The room erupted. Some gasped, some clapped. Mrs. Patterson openly wept. Marla froze. Just for a second. Then she lunged toward me. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think anyone here will protect you when your type ruins this community?" That sentence hung in the air like smoke from a grenade. Even Leonard shifted in his seat. I leaned forward, my voice steady, clear. "You tried to bury me under HOA rules," I said, "but I came back with concrete." Silence. The kind that does not ask for applause, only respect. Officer Martinez stepped between us. Marla's attorney pulled her back. Patricia called for order. I walked back to my seat. Claire met my eye from the back row. Noah gave me a quiet thumbs up. And just like that, the balance shifted. The morning after the meeting, the neighborhood felt different. It was not louder. It was not quieter. It was lighter, like someone had finally opened the windows and let the air move through again. By noon, the news had broken. HOA board member faces fraud investigation in Crescent Hill Estates. Exclusive, secret contracts, trash can, war spark, legal shakeup. The photos were impossible to ignore. Marla mid-outburst. Officer Martinez serving papers. And behind them, standing still and silent like a final witness, was the concrete trash can. 2 days later, Marla resigned. Her letter was short, 3 sentences, and filled with legal caveats. By the end of the week, her Range Rover was gone from the driveway. By the end of the month, her house was listed for sale. Her assets had been frozen. Her husband's name dragged into the investigation. What had started as neighborhood gossip had become a multi-agency probe into conflict of interest contracting and financial misconduct. But justice, I learned, does not arrive in grand fanfare. It settles slowly, like concrete curing in the sun, silent, steady, irreversible. I kept to myself after the dust settled, not because I wanted to disappear, but because I no longer needed to prove anything. People started waving more, nodding, asking questions about the city ordinance I had cited, or the legal language I had used. Some apologized for their silence. Others brought casseroles. One couple left a thank you note tucked under a bundle of flowers on our porch. I did not need the recognition, but I let it land. HOA meetings resumed a month later. Only this time, they were open, recorded, and posted to a public forum. Patricia Lopez was elected board president unanimously. She opened the first meeting by reading a new resolution: mandatory contract, disclosure, rotating voting privileges, anonymous reporting of abuse. And then she smiled and said, "Let's make sure no one in this room ever has to build a concrete trash can again." That got applause. The funds recovered from the fraudulent contracts totaled nearly $47,000. After legal fees and community repairs, the remaining budget was dedicated to rebuilding the long-neglected neighborhood playground. It had been nothing more than a rusted slide and a cracked swing set behind the community center. Claire helped design the new one. Noah picked out the basketball goals. I helped pour the concrete, again. And on the morning of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood between them, one hand on each of their shoulders. Neighbors gathered under a cloudless sky. Children climbed on brand-new equipment. Reporters circled quietly with cameras. There were speeches, thank yous, laughter. Then came the unveiling. Beside the new playground, near the flagpole, between the benches and flower beds, stood a simple pedestal. On it sat my trash can, the same one. Steel inside, plastic outside, dented from impact but undefeated. The HOA had asked my permission to display it permanently. I said yes, on one condition: there had to be a plaque. They agreed. It read, "The Brennan Can, symbol of resilience, proof of principle." When silence was not enough, this stood its ground. I watched as people walked past it, reading the plaque, pointing at the dents, explaining the story to their children like it was a fable. Claire turned to me, smiling sideways. "You realize you're a neighborhood legend now, right?" Noah added. "You should charge people $5 to touch it." I could handle the cash box. I laughed, for once, fully and freely. That night, back at home, we sat on the porch watching the stars come out, sipping root beer floats. No hearings, no threats, no envelopes in the mailbox, just peace. And beneath that peace, something stronger than satisfaction: vindication. Because I had not shouted, I had not threatened, I had not stormed the gates, I had simply endured, prepared, stood still while the system tried to shove me aside. And when the time came, I pushed back, with facts, with footage, with something heavier than anger, concrete. The bench faced the lake. It was the one near the edge of the walking path, where the water curled gently around the man-made shoreline, and the ducks moved without urgency. A single oak leaned toward the surface, like it was listening to something under the water. This was the first time I had sat here since we moved in. I had walked by it dozens of times over the past year, but never stopped, always too distracted by repairs, too focused on lawn height, too aware of where I did or did not belong. Back then, the silence had felt loaded, like every pause came with a price, like being still might invite another letter, another warning, another reason to question why I had chosen this place. Now, the silence just felt like silence. No edge, no judgment, just air. Claire and Noah were down by the basketball court, laughing as he tried to block her shot and failed, dramatically, on purpose. Their sneakers scuffed the new concrete, but no one came to complain. No one hovered with a clipboard. No one watched from behind drawn blinds. This was what I had come here looking for all those months ago. Not the applause, not the headlines, just this. The sound of my children feeling safe enough to laugh. Behind me, the community center buzzed with the aftermath of the ribbon cutting. People mingled. Kids played tag between the benches. The old neighborhood guard, what remained of it, stood to the side, unsure of their place in this new order. And there, beside the flagpole, stood the trash can, still dented, still standing. It had become more than I intended. A symbol, a monument, A story that people could point to and say, that's where it turned. But for me, it was never about the can. It was about the pattern, the quiet expectation that I would disappear, that I would bend, apologize, move. It was about watching my children watch me, and realizing that sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is stand still when everything in him wants to run. It is easy to yell when you are angry, harder to plan, harder to wait, hardest of all to fight without fists. But I had done that, and I had won. Not through spectacle, but through strategy. Not by becoming what they expected, but by remaining what they underestimated. The breeze came off the lake, soft and steady. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Concrete had settled, not just in the can, but in me. I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel and opened my eyes. Claire sat beside me, quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." It was the kind of thing she might have said 100 times before, but never had. And somehow, hearing it now, here, carried more weight than any courtroom verdict. I looked at her, smiled gently, and replied, "I'm proud of you too, for watching, for asking questions, for believing we deserve better." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "We do." And in that moment, I realized something else. It had never been just about protecting what was mine. It had been about showing them, my children, my neighbors, even my enemies, that justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is measured, quiet, heavy. Sometimes it rolls in on wheels and waits patiently at the curb, until someone tries to move it. I stood slowly, stretching, and looked out across the water one last time. Then I said it, to myself more than anyone else. Sometimes the loudest act of defiance is to stand your ground quietly and let the truth hit back harder than steel. Have you ever had to protect what was yours, in silence and against everyone? Share your story. You are not alone.